Hi, welcome to Virtual .NET Core Conf. It's great to be here in Madrid for a minute. I'm Rob Richardson, and today we're going to talk about ASP.NET Core in containers on .NET 5. Here's the part where I tell you I am definitely going to post the slides on my site tonight, but in this talk, there are no slides, only live code. This is going to be so much fun. Let's head off to robrich.org and we can see where the code is online right now. I went to robrich.org, clicked on presentations. Here's ASP.NET Core in containers on .NET 5. And the code up on GitHub is online right now. Now, while we're here on robrich.org, let's click on About Me and learn about some of the things that I've done recently. I'm a Cyril developer advocate. If you have database security needs, I would love to learn about them. I'm a Microsoft MVP, a Docker captain, and a friend of Redgate. AZ GiveCamp is really fun. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start building software Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver completed software to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp here in Madrid or wherever you're connecting from, hit me up on email or Twitter and let's get a GiveCamp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot with ASP.NET and Node. I run the Southeast Valley .NET user group. There's that logo right there. And one of the things I'm particularly proud of, I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air and they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So there's my claim to fame, my coveted .NET Rocks mug. So let's dig in. We want to containerize some products, and we'll do so both in legacy content and in brand new content. I've got an empty folder here, and so let's begin. I'm going to grab that folder name, and let's create a new project inside of Visual Studio. Now I'm going to come here, and I'm going to pick an ASP.NET Core web application, an MVC app, and let's put it here in Net App 1. I'll call this web app. I'll call this Net App 1. And I think it'll actually create that folder, so I'll leave it out of here. And let's create web application 1. Okay, it will be a .NET 5 project, no authentication, and I'm going to uncheck enable Docker. Let's come back to that one. So we've got this project, and with most ASP.NET projects, we'll probably have a website and we'll have a companion Windows service. So let's go build a Windows service next. We'll need to scaffold out this project a little bit. So here we go, scaffolding the project. It'll take a minute to restore the NuGet packages and get the other content fired up for Visual Studio. That's great. Go, 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 go. It does take Visual Studio a minute to capture this, so let's grab that content. There we go. Now we've got Visual Studio ready to go. We've got our web application in place, and we can see that we've got that NetApp folder right there. Okay, so now let's add our Windows Service project. Now this being .NET 5, we have the worker service template. So let's cruise through here and we'll look for the worker service. There we go. Now, unlike a Windows service project, this one is cross-platform. So that's great. We now have a cross-platform Windows service and we have a web application ready to go. Now we want to Dockerize this content. Now, if I had a regular Windows service, I would need to do a whole bunch of work about removing the Windows service-ness of this and making it a console application. But here we can tell with the worker service template, it's just a regular console app. That's great. So we'll call this execute async method, pass in a cancellation token, and as long as our service is continuing to run, it will continue to do this task. So let's Dockerize it. Our first step in creating a Dockerized content is to add a new file. Let's create a new item, and this will be a text file. And this text file will be a .dockerignore file. It's a text file. There we go. So here in our Docker ignore file, we want to list all of the content that we don't want to end up in our container. So all of our built content, bin and obj, all of our user-specific content, so star.user, star.suo, the .vs folder, and any dev-specific content, so app settings.development.json, pardon me, and launch settings.json. App settings.development.json and launch settings.json. Launch settings.json is all of the debug information about how to get to IIS and the various launch debug settings. In this case, a console app. It doesn't have a whole lot of content there. Okay, so now we have our Docker ignore file. That's perfect. Our next step is to create a Docker file. Now we're going to create a new file, add a new item. This will be a text file again, and we are going to mark this Docker file. Now it's important this be named Docker file and not dockerfile.txt. So let's come back in here and we will rename it and remove the .txt. We just want Docker file. Now this Docker file is all of the steps that we'll need as our configuration as code file to be able to get from our source code into our running image. Now we do want to build inside the container. So we'll start out with from, copy, run, and cmd. These are the main commands that we'll work with in our Docker file. If you understand these 4 main commands, you'll probably be able to read most Docker files. We will execute some more, and we'll see some more in our work today, but these 4 are the main ones. Let's start with from. Now we want to build on a base image, so let's come over here to Docker Hub. We'll search for .NET, and we'll pull up this repo that is a link to lots of other repos. .NET Samples is great. That shows us lots of different Docker files. .NET Runtime Deps, that's all of the things that we would need to be able to install .NET. On top of that is the .NET Runtime that helps us run console apps. On top of that is ASP.NET to be able to run websites. And on top of that is the .NET SDK, the build tools. Now we want to build inside of a container, so let's go grab that one. And we can see the base image right here. Now if we scroll down a little bit farther, we can see the other labels that we can get at. And using the 5.0 label is great. That's based on Debian. But there is an Alpine label here. If we use 5.0-Alpine, then we'll get a much lighter weight image. That's perfect. So from mcr.microsoft.com/.net/SDK 5.0-Alpine. Great. Now let's copy in all of the content from the directory where we'll run our docker build command. That'll be this directory, to the directory inside of our image. And where's that directory? Let's specify that. Workdir is /src. Now it could definitely be var lib somewhere, but /src is great. Now we've copied in all of our content except for all of the things that we've chosen to ignore here in our Docker ignore file. And so now we'll run some commands. Now what are the commands that we would run from the console to be able to build up our application? .NET restore, .NET build, and we'll build in release mode. .NET test. We'll also test in release mode so that we don't get both a debug and a release folder. And then now we need to run these as Docker commands. So let's no. Let's run this one and run this one and run this one. There, we just turned console commands into Docker commands. And then cmd is the thing that will run as we kick off our application. So let's do .NET worker service 1.dll. Now that is in the /source/ oh, this is in the dist folder. So let's build to the dist folder. There we go. And this will be workdir /dist. Perfect. Now we have a Docker file that would work just fine in production. But there are a few things that we can clean up to make this even better. Right now we have the build tools and our source code in our production container. Let's come back out to Docker Hub and we'll take a look at the .NET Runtime base image. Now this .NET Runtime base image only includes the details that we need to run our container, our .NET solution. It doesn't include the build tools. Great. Scrolling down, we can see that we also have an Alpine version, so we'll use that. Back here in Visual Studio, I'm going to split this and we'll say from there. And now we have a .NET. Now we've forked our thing into two pieces. This one we'll call our build server image, and this is our production runtime image server image. Now we do need to copy the content here. Let's copy the content. We'll switch this to app. We'll copy the content from the dist folder into the current folder, but we do need to copy this from equals build. If we didn't have this, it would copy it from our local machine. Where is build? Let's name this one as build. Great. Now we do want to set a few environment variables. So let's set this environment variable that tells ASP.NET. Oh, actually we're in a worker service, so we don't need to do that yet. Cool. The other thing we can do is here we're copying in everything. That will create a new Docker layer. Then we're doing a restore. So if I change one of these C# files, it will restore my NuGet packages. Now I probably want to do that a little differently. I would like to restore my NuGet packages and then copy everything. Now I still need to copy in my manifest, so worker service 1.csproj into the current directory. But now if I don't change my NuGet packages, I won't also restore them. That's perfect. That will make my build a lot faster if I'm running locally. Okay, so now that we're here, let's go into the netapp1 folder, into the worker service 1 folder, and we will do a Docker build. Let's tag this as netapp1 service and build. Presuming that I saved all the things. So now we'll do all of those steps in our Docker file, our configuration as code. We'll restore our NuGet packages. We'll do our .NET build. And finally, we'll run all of our unit tests. Now, in this case, there aren't any unit tests, so I'm pretty sure none of the unit tests will pass, and we'll be able to move on to the next step. So here, we're doing a .NET build. Looks like the build succeeded. Let's run all of our tests. There are no tests, so that'll succeed. And then we'll flip over into that new image where we've got that content ready to go. Great. So now that we've got this netapp1 SVC in place, let's do a Docker run. Not that one. Docker run netapp1 SVC. We were able to Dockerize this Windows service, and now every second it will go do the task. That is great. Now let's Dockerize this web app. Like any good developer, we're going to go copy and paste this content. Let's copy the Docker file and .dockerignore file, copy those into our web application, and we're ready to go. Now, we may need to adjust this, so let's go look at our Docker file, make sure we're ignoring all of the things that we need to. That looks great. Let's open up our Docker file, and now it's not called worker service 1, it's web application 1, and we don't want to run worker service 1, we want to run web application 1. And we also have one more step here. We also need to run .NET publish. We'll publish in release mode to the dist folder. And that is the same as if we were to right click here and publish and copy it to a particular folder. That'll get all of the DLLs, all of the web and JavaScript, CSS, and images in place and allow us to then publish that into place. Now, we also don't want to use the runtime image. We want to use the ASP.NET image. And we also want to set some environment variables. Now, these environment variables will help Docker know how to be able to start our application. Let's set the environment variable to run it in production. We'll set it to run on port 80, and we'll expose port 80 so anyone listening knows how to run our site. Cool. So with that in place, we've still got our worker service in place. Let's go to NetApp1, Web Application 1, Docker build. We'll tag this as NetApp1 Web, and let's build it. Similar to what we did with our worker service, this will go through our configuration as code file and run all of the steps. So first we'll .NET restore. Let's go grab all of our NuGet packages, download those into our container. Now that we've got our NuGet packages in place, we'll copy the rest of our files and then run a .NET build. The .NET build will go do all of the steps necessary to turn our website into our functioning product. Once we've got the .NET build done, we will run all of our tests. Here's where we run the tests. Now in this case, this project doesn't have any tests, so I'm pretty sure that will pass. .NET publish, now we're copying it into that dist folder, and then we'll copy that dist folder into that new image, and now we're ready to go. .NET Docker run will forward in port 8080 to port 80 inside the container, and we will run NetApp1 web. Now that we've got this website containerized, we can go visit this site, localhost 8080, and we can view our website. That was cool. Now, if we had a legacy application, we could definitely move this into Visual Studio, handcraft these Docker files, and build up a really elegant solution here. Let's do a similar thing, but let's take a look at the tools baked into Visual Studio that might help us with this. So let's do a Docker container list, and we'll remove some containers. Docker container rm b83. That'll stop our website. Let's also stop our Windows service 9bb. It's been going just fine for this whole time. And let's close this project inside of Visual Studio, and we'll use our Visual Studio tools to be able to build a similar project. So now I want to build a new project. And let's build this project. Again, we'll build an ASP.NET MVC project. Next. Now we'll call this NetApp2 Web Application 1. Sounds great. Now in this case, we will choose to enable Docker support. And now we're prompted to suggest our operating system. In this case, Linux sounds like a good choice. Let's create that project. And now it's going to scaffold out that website again. Here's our website. We've got our controllers, we've got our views. Let's come here into this home view, and instead of just welcome, we'll say welcome to virtual.net core conf. Awesome. Now, because we checked the enable Docker support, we also have this Docker file built into our application. Now here in this case, it's using the ASP.NET 5.0 as base. The SDK is set in place, and we do all the steps. Now, the one that we built was a little bit leaner, maybe a little bit easier to understand, but we've still got the same content in place. We're copying the web application 1, and then we're building it. Then we're doing a publish. We don't have the unit tests running in this project, but we pretty much got everything that we're looking for. And we're able to scaffold it pretty easily. That's cool. Let's go add the next project. Let's come in here and we will add a new project. Let's go grab the worker service project. So here's the worker service. Next, worker service 1, that sounds great. And I'm going to accidentally forget to enable Docker support here. Now we've got a project, And we want to be able to use Visual Studio tools to be able to get that into containers. Well, let's right click here and we will say add Docker support. Now we get to pick our operating system again. We're running Linux containers in this case. And so we'll say go, and it will scaffold out that Docker file for us. Here's our Docker file, and it's doing great. We've got all of the content in place that we needed. Now, if we were to build and run these, so let's come into NetApp 2. Oh, where did I put that? Let's open up that folder and take a look at it. I bet I put it in repos instead. Copy full path. Oh, not into the solution. Let's go there. There we go. So now we're here in NetApp 2. Let's go to Web Application 1. We can say Docker build. We'll tag this as NetApp 2 web. And we will specify that dot for the current folder that we want to build in. Oh, actually, I think we probably need to build in. Yep, that failed. It expects us to start back here. So let's do this. Docker build. We'll tag it as NetApp 2-web and give it this current folder as our context. But we also need to specify the file. And so this will be in Web Application 1 Docker file. And there's that dot. There. Now, because we're building at the base of the project where the solution is, we can now get to other projects if we're including class libraries or other projects in our application. It'll do that same process where it will restore our NuGet packages, do a .NET build, and ultimately do a .NET publish into a new image. So let's take a look at our build. Looks like our build is going well. We've already restored the NuGet packages. Let's .NET publish in release mode to that publish directory. So here goes that publish. That worked out great. And now we can say Docker run. Let's forward in port 8080 to port 80 in our container and launch NetApp 2 web. If we hit up now port 8080 on our local machine, we will see our new website. That looks great. And we can do a similar thing for building up our Windows app. Let's go grab that directory again. Where is that? There it is. CD to there. And let's do a Docker build. We'll give it the file of Windows of worker service Docker file, tag it as NetApp 2 SVC, and the current folder is dot. Now that we've got that kicking off, it'll do a similar process of restoring our NuGet packages, building our product, and ultimately publishing into a separate container that doesn't include the build tools so that we can run it in a really lean way. Here's our build. Now, one of the interesting things about this Docker file is that we're not really specifying the details of the operating system. We didn't do -alpine. We're not doing anything there that is very operating system specific. So what if we were to switch over to Windows containers? I'm going to hit the Docker whale here, and I'm going to switch to Windows containers. Now it gives me a message telling me it may take a minute to get there. That's totally fine. Let's switch, and I will do a Docker image list. And now in the image list we see not the Linux-based containers, but we see the Windows-based containers. So we've got some nano server stuff going on, .NET framework stuff going on. That's pretty cool. Let's do that similar build command. So let's build our worker service, give it the Docker file, and tag it as NetApp 2. Now the interesting thing here, because our Docker file doesn't use any Linux or Windows specific commands, then this will work just fine. It is building a Windows container, not a Linux container, but we can see how our Docker file is pretty universal across the two platforms. Now we could do a similar process of building up our website and launching that. Let's do that in a minute too. So right now we're doing a .NET restore of our NuGet packages. Once the restore works, then we'll do a .NET build. I'm pretty confident our build will work. And then we'll publish that content into a new container. So here we are doing that .NET restore. Go, 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 go. Yep, we've got our NuGet packages in place. Let's do the build. Here goes the build. Go, 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 go. Here's our build kicking up. Now we're copying the rest of the content. Here's our build kicking up. So now that we've got all of our NuGet packages in place, we can just kick off the build. It will build in release mode and publish that content into the /app/build folder. This looks great. Pardon me. So we can pass in an additional flag inviting the build not to recheck NuGet packages, but it double checked and it validated that all of our NuGet packages are already in place. So we've got no warnings, no errors, and it looks like our build succeeded. Now we switch over to our new image where we're running our, where we don't have our SDK installed, only our runtime, and we can kick off that content to be able to publish our worker service. Oh, we're doing the publish. So here we're going and collecting all of the content, and we've published that content into the bin folder. We'll also copy that into /app/publish, flip over to our new one, and we've got that successfully tagged. Perfect. Now let's go build our website in Windows mode. So web, and we'll pass in the web app 1 here, web application 1, and we'll do those same steps of building up our website. So let's go create this base image there, and we'll kick off our web build, run a .NET restore. Now, ideally, we're caching these packages, and so perhaps we're downloading these from a local source rather than a remote source. In this case, I haven't built in Windows in a while, so it may take it a minute to restore these NuGet packages. That's totally fine. Let's restore these NuGet packages. Ooh, it looks like it restored them in 7.25 seconds. Very nice. So then next we will copy in all of our web files. This includes the C# and the JavaScript and the CSS and the images. There we go. Now let's build in release mode. Let's see if our build works as expected. Once we've got our build in place, we'll run all of our unit tests and publish that into a new container. So here goes our build. I think it might work. Let's see. Go, 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 go. All of our projects are up to date. Now let's flip over to the build, and it looks like we've got, looks like that will succeed. Go, 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 go. Ooh, no warnings, no errors. Excellent. Now let's do a .NET publish. This will collect all those resources and allow us to have this really deterministic build that we might choose to publish into IIS. Now in this case, because we're running on Windows containers, then we might be able to publish into IIS, but in this case, we'll probably still use Kestrel as our runtime host. Okay, so we've published that content into our, we're publishing that content into our image, and then let's copy that content into the new image that only includes the ASP.NET runtime. Now this being a Windows container, we do have C app, so that's pretty cool. But the syntax in our Docker file is identical. Okay, so now let's Docker run. We'll forward in port 8081 here to port 80 in the container, netapp2-web, and let's start up this website in Windows mode. Now I chose to forward port 8081 because I still have port 8080 focused on this website. Now that I've got port 8081 running, I can come over here to localhost. Let's fire up localhost 8081. And here's the Windows mode container, and it's working just fine. Now, as we switched from Linux mode into Windows mode, it did tell us that we could only run one side at a time, but we can see that our Linux container here on port 8080 is still running. Rather, we just can't control it at the same time. So that's easy enough. Let's hit Control C. Oh, that's not going to go. So Docker container list. Let's remove our Windows site, E54. And then let's switch back into, I have to rm-f to both remove, to stop and remove it at the same time. Let's switch back into Linux mode and take a look at, it may take a minute to start. And now let's do a Docker container list. And now we're looking at the Linux containers. So Docker container rm-f c37. Now we've removed the container out of Linux mode as well. Docker container list, and we see that we have no containers. Now back here in Visual Studio, it was really great to be able to run these containers both in Windows mode and in Linux mode. Let's take a look at debugging these containers. Now I'm going to close all the applications, close all tabs, and let's add some container orchestration support. I'm going to say add. Now, much like we chose Docker support previously to get the content into the worker service when we forgot, we can choose container orchestrator support here. Now, by default, it will use Kubernetes and Helm to build up a Helm chart for our project. That's great, but let's move to Docker Compose mode for our development needs. Now it's going to ask us what operating system. We saw how we could run this container in both Windows or Linux, and it worked just fine. Here it's asking the operating system questions so that it can map the volumes correctly. And okay, that's fine. Here's that Docker Compose file that it generated for us. The Docker Compose file includes our web application. And if we take a look at the override file, we'll see how it's not only setting the development environment and the URLs, but it's also mapping in our user secrets and the development certificate. That means that we won't get any certificate errors as we run in HTTPS mode inside of our container. We can see now that we've got some Docker commands running in our console as it pulls down the details it needs to be able to run WinDebug or VSDebug inside the container. That's cool. Now let's add container orchestrator support to this worker service as well. Add container orchestrator support. And we'll choose Docker Compose again. And it will add these details to our existing Docker Compose file. We'll choose our operating system, and we'll see that it includes this worker service here in our Docker Compose details as well. Now, if we wanted to, we could include things like depends on, so that we can get this link between the two. Web application 1. But in this case, it's okay if we run both of them at the same time. So let's remove that depends on section. But here we could also include a database if we needed to, or perhaps a cache like Redis. Now, once we've got our application in place, we notice that it's now flipped over to a Docker Compose project. Now we have this Docker Compose project, but if we look here in our source code, the Docker Compose project, we need to get back to our NetApp 2. Our Docker Compose project isn't actually a separate project. We don't have a separate folder for it. We do have an OBJ file where built Docker Compose content will be, but it's just telling us that we've got this docker compose.dcproj file here in the root of our project. Okay, let's set a breakpoint here in our home controller right here on our index view. Let's also set a breakpoint here in our worker service inside the loop where we're doing our work. And let's start to debug. Pardon me. Because we've chosen this Docker Compose startup project, then we can launch Docker Compose. We could also come in here and say, I would like to run web application 1, but running Docker Compose means that we'll start up all the microservices associated with our Docker Compose file. So let's start debugging here. Now we'll see as it builds, it's not going to run wacky Microsoft Docker commands. It's actually running regular Docker commands in this console. So it looks like it's building outside the Docker container. That's totally fine. And then it's going to copy that built content into the container to begin debugging. There we go. There's our Docker Compose file. We've got some overrides to map in the details and a debug override. That's in our OBJ folder. Now that we've got our content running, then we'll be able to fire up those two things. So let's go find all of the running containers that might have these names and kill them off. In this case, it's found those containers. And it will attach those debuggers into those two containers. So I love that I've got this container section here in Visual Studio that allows me to loop through all of the containers that I have running. So here's my web application. Here's my worker service. I can take a look at the environment variables that I have in each one. I can take a look at the labels and ports and volumes. And it's still starting, which is why this is not going so fast. I can take a look at the logs associated with that. And now once I've got these two containers running, then we'll see we've got our website launched. Now, the first thing that we hit here is we hit a breakpoint inside of our worker service. That's great. We can take a look around. We can look at our variables. We can examine their values. And that is perfect. So what's date time offset now? We can take a look at those details. I'll hit play, and a second later, we'll hit that exact piece again. But now we hit our breakpoint inside of our controller. So let's take a look at that view. Similarly, we can take a look at all of the local variables that we have. We can say F10 or F11 to be able to step over or step into. I'll push go, and we'll come back to our worker service. Let's take off this breakpoint and push play again. Now that I've got my content in place and I'm debugging, it's an exact same debugging experience as I would have if I was debugging this project locally. I just happen to be running in containers instead. So in this case, Linux containers, and that worked out really well. Here we've got our website, and it happens to be running on a random port. That's the port that Visual Studio happened to choose for Docker. That's really cool. We got to see here how we debugged an application inside of Visual Studio. We got to see how we added container orchestrator support, in this case, a Docker Compose file. We got to see how we could use Visual Studio to scaffold out both the Docker file and the .dockerignore file. And we got to see how we could build up these Docker files by hand if we needed to. Now, ultimately, building them by hand will ensure that they are exactly the way that we need them, but getting Visual Studio to generate it might be a cool shortcut. We also saw how we could run Linux containers and Windows containers just as easily, just by flipping the switch inside of the Docker desktop setup. The code for this session is online here on GitHub at github.com/robrich. And you can get to that really easily by coming to robrich.org, click on presentations, and this session is right there at the top. I'll join you in that spot where the conference is designated for live Q&A. And if you are watching this later and have questions, hit me up at rob_rich on Twitter, and let's continue the conversation. Thanks for joining us here at Virtual.NET Core Conf in Madrid. I look forward to your questions.